Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're going to get started in just a moment. We have quite a few people already in the webinar, and I'm really excited that you all have chosen to join us for this conversation. As if you were on an airplane, just in case, you're in the conversation about global change makers and the impact of international generosity. If you didn't mean to be here, please feel free to stay. It's going to be a good conversation. I'll do a little bit of housekeeping as we begin, but if you did not submit any questions during your registration, please feel free to do so now. Think about them now, and also be prepared because we're going to do a little bit of a poll. We always like to find out more about the audience. So be sure to look for that feature pop up in a few moments. So, okay, this is great. So thank you, and we're going to begin our poll now. So please jump in. The two questions are you a philanthropist? In More Philanthropy, we always talk about philanthropy and the definition and the meaning of philanthropy and what philanthropy looks like in myriad communities and diasporas. And so we like to ask this question because I think sometimes people are philanthropists, but they sometimes don't think they are because of public narratives or have been shaped in their own community or environment. So that's the first question. And then what brought you to this session? Excellent. So welcome again. I am Yvonne Moore, and I am the Managing Director of Moore Philanthropy. And again, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation with global change makers and the impact of international generosity. A few housekeeping things I want to take care of before we begin. One, interpretation. A huge thank you to our interpreter today, Mario. To activate the interpretation feature on Zoom, please find and click on the globe at the bottom of the screen labeled interpretation. If you have your screen fully enabled, you may have to roll your mouse down toward the bottom of your screen for that pop-up, for that menu to pop up again. Select the language you would like to hear. And as an option, if you would like to hear you don't want to hear the audio, you can also click mute original. And I hope I'm saying this correct. If you do not want to hear the English audio, then click mute original. The second thing is Q&A. Again, look at the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, near that same button where you look for the interpreter. We'll be addressing questions during the designated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. We're going to start that at the top of the hour, so please go ahead and think about your questions. And I believe it gives us the option of answering those questions live, or if there's so many questions we can't get to them live, the panelists can also begin to answer some of the questions within the Q&A. In the chat, feel free to use the chat for any technical issues or general comments. Our team is monitoring the chat to assist with any questions that you may have, so feel free to use that chat. Today's webinar is being recorded. We'll be sending the recording along with any relevant materials to all registered participants within a few days. And accessibility. If you need closed captioning, you can turn it on by clicking the CC button at the bottom of the Zoom window. Again, that's at the very bottom of the window. If you have your screen enabled fully, you may have to roll your mouse down so you can actually find that button. So I hope everybody responded to the poll. Excellent. So again, my name is Yvonne Moore. I'm head of Moore Philanthropy. And if you don't know anything about Moore Philanthropy, excellent. I see the poll results. Okay, cool. I'm gonna take a look at those really quickly. Interesting. So about 60% of the audience considers themselves a philanthropist, and about 40% do not. Interesting. What brought you to this session? I want to learn more. Majority of the respondents said, I want to learn more about philanthropy in different parts of the world. I'm so glad to hear that. Want to know more about the panelists. S.A. and Ana Maria, they want to know more about you all. And I want to learn how to increase the impact of donors globally. I love it. I love it. So thank you all so much for responding to the poll. If you don't know anything about Moore Philanthropy, we are a hybrid firm, both a for-profit and a nonprofit, focused on reversing the lack of investment in communities of color, particularly those of the African diaspora. And in turn, we work in multiple ways with multiple partners to ensure investment and wealth building are happening and increasing in our communities. A core focus of Moore Philanthropy from the beginning has been lifting up the philanthropy of people from the African diaspora. And I know many of my friends and colleagues within institutional philanthropy were actually raised by families to be givers, yet this narrative rarely plays out in conversations within the sector. Today's conversation is actually a continuation of a conversation that Moore Philanthropy, Hispanics in Philanthropy began during the 2024 Skoll World Forum's Marmalade Festival in Oxford, England. Hilda and I are often trying to find ways to collaborate. And Ana Maria, who is president at HIP, one of the things that we promised each other at the Skoll World Forum in 2023 was that we would have a conversation in 2024 about donors of color, because from both of our diasporas, we find the narrative to be the same. Particularly within Western or institutional philanthropy, that people of color are not donors, are not givers, we're only recipients. And we know for a fact that's actually extremely, extremely untrue. Along with HIP, we were also joined by Thousand Currents. Salome Lema, who heads up Thousand Currents, also joined us in this conversation in Oxford. And post that conversation, we really wanted to create a space and a voice, particularly among Western leaders. We wanted them to hear it, i.e., in other words, about the presence and power of philanthropy within diasporas of color around the world. The room was packed, and there was even a waiting list. And this told us that there may be room to broaden the conversation, hence our gathering today. So really quickly, some of the learning that came out of the conversation at Skoll, we have to include social change resourcing frameworks outside of Western philanthropic institutions. And when we say that, we're talking about frameworks that lead to social change, things like remittances or mutual aid or giving circles, the ways that individuals engage globally in their own philanthropy. Institutional philanthropy is just one tactic. And going back to the actual definition of philanthropy or love of humanity, and this work telling us that this work actually encompasses what we now see as the 5 T's. We used to talk about time, treasure, and talent, but now people are talking about their social ties. They're using their social ties to connect each other to great organizations, to give to other organizations, and they're also using their testimony to talk about great nonprofits and great leaders around the world. The other thing we talked a lot about is that we can do much better when it comes to inclusive philanthropy, looking at strategies like trust-based philanthropy, looking at engaging next generation donors, young donors, and how they're thinking about their own philanthropy, how they're thinking about their family's philanthropy. And finally, a call to action. We always want to have a call to action. We always want folks to get moving and grooving once they get back to their home, to begin thinking about how you build genuine relationships in philanthropy. We emphasize the importance of authentic relationships with donors, institution, and grantee partners. Avoid assumptions about donors of color, about who gives, how people give, their capacity to give, what philanthropy is supposed to look like, as well as an understanding of what impact is and what impact looks like, particularly depending on the issue that you're talking about. Adaptive philanthropic tools and practices to serve donors better, broader recognition of diverse forms of giving and generosity, and advocating for expanded philanthropic recognition, push for systemic change that recognizes the values and values all forms of philanthropy, expanding the definition of giving and of being generous. So we are continuing the conversation today by opening up the space, and we wanted to make room for colleagues from Latin America and from the continent of Africa. because we know that even within a single diaspora, there are very different cultures, backgrounds, and therefore learning to be had. So one of the things that was exciting about today is that we had almost 200 people register, I believe, and that was exciting. We have a large swath of folks from North America, and we have a huge swath of folks from Africa. And we also have some folks from Europe and Asia and other parts of the world. So that part was really, really exciting. As we get moving into the conversation with S.A. and Ana Maria, I'm excited to bring them in. I'm going to have them introduce themselves in a moment, but I want to just kind of formally introduce you, if you will. S.A. Emerhi is the Global Network Weaver for the Community Fund for Community Foundations, and she is based in Nigeria. And Ana Maria Guerrero is the president of the board of Fundación Carvajal, and she's based in Colombia. Thank you for your grace, Ana Maria. I was actually talking to Emerson earlier. I determined to pronounce it correctly.
You did, perfect.
Thank you. I am so very excited to hear from both of you. As we open, I want to ask each of you to please take a couple of minutes to introduce yourself and be sure to share with us your own personal story and work in philanthropy. Those elements that resonate most for you when we talk about international generosity. So just take a couple of minutes each, and then we'll kind of jump into some questions. S.A., can I begin with you?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to try to turn on my video so you guys can see me. Hello, everyone. It's really nice to meet you. And to be honest, I'm a little bit about being in philanthropy that I do. Can you all still hear me? Your screens, at least Yvonne's screen, you're frozen. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay?
S.A., it's breaking up a little bit. Shucks.
Okay.
But that's okay. You can try again later.
Yeah. Can you hear me better now? I've turned off my video.
Yes, much better. Thank you so much. I love your avatar. It's beautiful.
All right, thank you so much. Well, so as Yvonne said, my name is S.A. Emerhi. I'm with the Global Fund for Community Foundations, and I am based in Port Harcourt, Nigeria. A lot of my work is very much centered around championing and advocating for a different and a more humane way of doing development differently, and using community philanthropy as a deliberate strategy for advancing change, working with global South actors to shift power that really centers agency and voice. Just a bit of a sentence about who the Global Fund is. The Global Fund for Community Foundations, we are a convening, networking, and bridge building organization. We've been around since 2006, and we believe that long-term change that is towards what we call a good society and the future that we want really requires the collective action of individuals and institutions. These are located both at the fringes and at the center of power, mostly working at the grassroots, local, national, and international levels. I like to call myself a activist philanthropist, if there is such a term as that, but more specifically, sort of the radical feminist type philanthropy that really advocates about addressing systemic tools of oppression in the way that we work. So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. Thank you so much, S.A. Ana Maria?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this great invitation. My name is Ana Maria Guerrero. I live in Bogota, Colombia, South America. Although I studied journalism, I have been working in social development for my entire life. My family is based in Cali, And my grandfather created an NGO with his brothers and sisters and cousins in 1961. So my family is highly involved in philanthropy in Colombia. And I myself, I grew up in the middle of the foundation, and that's where I became very passionate about this work. So I live in Bogota, but I travel to Cali almost every week because the foundation is based in Cali, and the foundation works in improving people's lives. Unfortunately, Cali has a high poverty rate. Cali is close to 3 million inhabitants city. And we also work in Buenaventura, which is the largest port in the Pacific coast, where poverty rates reach 80% of the population. So we work in both in Cali and Buenaventura and some small cities around, basically trying to improve people's lives and overcome poverty. I'm very excited to be here. I'm far away. I'm not an expert, but very passionate about this conversation, this work in social development. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to jump right in. So I want to find out, I was talking about this earlier just a little bit, but recognizing that no community is a monolith. What are some of the, if you would both share, what are some of the diverse approaches to giving within different diasporas? Can you share what philanthropy might look like in your community? And I won't, I'll start, Anna Maria, I'll start with you this time. So I started with SA last time. I'll go back and forth. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, philanthropy in Latin America and in Colombia is generally associated with millionaires donating large amounts of resources to different social goals. But from our point of view, the term must include other kinds of donations equally valuable. I mean, philanthropists for us are related to people who donate their talent, their passion, their resources, their community networks in order to improve other people's lives. And we actually find great examples of those community heroes that are champions in philanthropy that were born in the poorest slums of Colombia. So in our country, of course, there are millionaires and big corporations that donate a lot of money and do extraordinary social work. But we do see a lot of invisible community heroes that bring to the table great solutions and that have managed to move the needle of very diverse social causes in Colombia. So it's I would say it's a combination of huge capital and very local, very effective community social work.
Excellent. I love that, community heroes. Thank you. Thank you. SA?
I think it's a bit similar when you think about philanthropy on the African continent. So when it comes to Africa and African philanthropy, if we are to only focus on the giving done by high network individuals, then just like Anna mentioned, you really then miss out on the many different ways that everyday Africans give. And I think, in fact, the word philanthropist or philanthropy is actually something that does not resonate at a deep level with your average African. Instead, we will use words like giving or giver, which is more inclusive to, like Anna mentioned, when you mentioned philanthropists, you're talking about people who give in the millions or who give in the thousands. But the everyday giving, usually this is $1, this is $10, maybe as high as $50, but people helping one another. I think for most Africans, it's a term, like I said earlier, that is not something that they resonate with. Giving in Africa is very much of a kinship type of giving And it is understood through the links of family, your community, maybe associations you're part of. But there is a way, I think, what I've seen in the African philanthropic space, especially in the last maybe 2-3 years, a push to really decolonize our mindsets around what philanthropy is. You know, philanthropy in the true African sense is really not a Western monopoly. It is not the development sector, actually. It is not transactional. It is about, like Yvonne in your introduction, truly Ubuntu, you know, I am because you are, you know, we are safe because we are each other's keepers. And I think if African philanthropy is only ever acknowledged just in the short term, given that is usually palliative in nature, that usually responds to crisis or some sort of emergency disaster. If we move away from that and think about the everyday giving, then it really is about moving the needle in terms of systems change. So the big numbers that people know about in terms of high net worth giving is something like almost 60 million annually, which is a lot. But when you add the everyday giving, it's probably triple that. You know, and like I said earlier, I do consider myself a philanthropist because that's the formal term or jargon that we use in this sector. But I'm a giver, and it's been it's sort of part of our DNA as Africans.
Exactly. I'm gonna so thank you both for the answer to that question. It's actually brilliant, and it so resonates, I think, with what we learn, and we also believe in more philanthropy. And one of the things you made me think about, SAN.
Is it me? Did we lose Yvonne?
We lost Yvonne, right?
Yes, temporarily. She'll be back shortly.
Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hafiz Rashid. I'm Chief of Staff of More Philanthropy. We had some technical difficulties, but I'm going to hop right in. Anna Marie, did you have anything to add?
No, I totally agree with Eze. She expressed very nicely what I had in mind. So I resonate with each one of her words.
Can you describe a bit, Essay touched on the term philanthropy and how it resonates with communities that she's familiar with? Oh, Yvonne, you're back. I wanted to hear some of your comments. You're on mute.
Can everyone see and hear me now? I'm so sorry. I actually yanked my I just yanked the plug out. Anywho,
I'll cede the floor to you.
Thank you so much, Hafiza. Essay, thank you so much. So Anna Marie and Essay, both your comments actually resonated so much. And I want to pick that back up again. Essay, one of the things you made me think about were remittances, and how some actually folks don't think about the giving from diasporas and other parts of the world back to their home country. And the number that the World Bank last reported was around $700 billion. And I don't think, when you talk about giving on the continent in particular, and what that looks like for folks and how it actually shows up actually in both of your comments, that's an astounding amount of money. But Essay, I want to kind of stay on that same vein, because we among ourselves know everything that you all just stated is true. But how do we elevate some of these practices into the global conversation on philanthropy? I think when Ana Maria at HIP and I think about this work, we think about elevating this conversation so that the narrative can actually shift and change. How can we elevate some of those practices, SA?
I think one of the biggest challenges about local giving in Africa is that, unfortunately, there is no one central space or platform or organization where our collective giving is documented. It's in pieces here and there. It's been held with different organizations, different institutions. And because of this, it is often discounted or dismissed as not important. I think, like if there are examples in terms of what local giving looks like, it's in, like I mentioned, it's in different forms, semi-informal, informal, sometimes formal structures. But they all play a role in addressing community needs and fostering social cohesion. So I'll just give you an example of what local giving, at least some of the data that I have. So in Kenya, for instance, almost 100% of the population, specifically 93% of the population, give to individuals instead of organizations. And one of the reasons for that is around the trust factor. So that is still one of the other challenges with giving in Africa, is that there's still a lot of mistrust with NGOs, with CBOs, and in particular with government and bilaterals. So when people give, they give to those that are close to them. And like I said, in Kenya, it is 93% of the population who does this. In Ghana, it is 72% of the population who donate, but interestingly, they donate to charities and religious institutions. That's where the giving tends to go. In Nigeria, it is 68%. And again, here, just like Ghana, it is usually to charity organizations and religious organizations. The lowest that we have the data for is in Ethiopia, which is around 37% of the population who donated or donate on a regular basis to charity institutions. So that's what local giving looks like in Africa, and with some of the challenges around documenting and elevating some of these practices.
Thank you, thank you. Ana Maria, I know your family has this just astounding and incredible legacy of giving in Colombia. And I was looking at, actually I was looking at an article, an interview that you did, talking about how you began as a child visiting your family's company, and that your mom's influence on how programs are now set up to actually focus on families and in a holistic way, right? The legacy of her, I guess what she began. Talk to me about how you all try to elevate or think about putting philanthropy forward in Colombia.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I grew up in the middle of this family foundation, and I thought that it was more common. But then I realized that when my grandfather and the family decided to create the foundation, actually in 1961, there were only 5 foundations in Colombia. So nowadays we all hear about social responsibility and sustainability, and all big and medium corporations are investing in social development. But back then in 1960, that was quite revolutionary. It was not common at all. And but my family has this belief that, of course, I share, that the biggest, the privileges, the largest should be our responsibility to give back. And my grandfather used to say that it is impossible for a business to succeed within a nil social environment. And that's why he decided to donate, together with the rest of the family, 40% of the shares in the company to create the foundation. So actually today, the biggest shareholder of Carvajal is the foundation. And it has been very interesting, because afterwards, we started to partner with other companies that were inspired by this Carvajal family work, and they decided themselves to create their own NGOs. Today in Colombia, we find close to 600 NGOs in all sorts of social causes. And I think the movement is growing, and it's great to see that there is more and more commitment or from the private sector to get involved in the solution of social challenges.
Thank you. I want to jump to impact. You know, it's funny. I think, and sometimes in institutional philanthropy, particularly in the U.S., we think we know what we want when it comes to impact, but we often don't understand the full breadth of the issue that we're actually supposed to be funding or supporting. And I know this is actually something that's actually important to both of you, is actually, you know, SA, the work that you've done with Shift to Power, and Ana Maria, the work that you're doing to really look at impact and evaluation. And Ana Maria, I'll start with you. How can we shift, well, actually not so much shift, but I want to talk about definitions of success. What does impact look like? And maybe how you work with your grantee partners or with your partners in Colombia to actually think about what that impact will actually look like. I know that this is, you know, when you think about strategy and impact, how do you all approach that work?
It's a very difficult question because, of course, there is no one single definition of impact, and it depends on the
Exactly.
the approach of each individual and each organization. For some organizations, impact can be reflected on the amount of resources the institution leverages, for example, or the large numbers of beneficiaries, or the ability to change other people's lives. For me, or for us at Carvajal Foundation, the key for successful development, or the measure of impact for us, is the ability to foster self-efficacy in communities and help them be like the protagonists or the heroes of their own stories. And I like to quote Tim Bird, the founder of Fundación Paraguaya, because when he talks about the role of social institutions, he says that our role is to rub the Aladdin lamp. So the genius every citizen has inside emerges. And I love to quote him, because I think for us, our impact is measured in that sense. So the extent to which we manage to help all these geniuses emerge from communities, we are doing a good job.
Thank you for saying that. That's actually exactly what I wanted to pull out is, it looks different. And it's the community is that actually is, I mean, they're the ones that are deciding what success looks like for their communities. So thank you so much. SA, I'll go actually to you too. How are communities shaping their own definitions of giving and success?
Yeah, this is hard. This is hard. I think for us, we focus on, or at least we enter the conversation. And when I say us, I'm talking about the Global Fund for Community Foundation. We enter this conversation talking about power and the role that power dynamics, toxic power dynamics in the development system, in the international and philanthropy system has shaped our thinking, our behaviors. There are many colonial legacies that we have inherited that sometimes we need to truly shift our mindset. And this is a conversation, or at least a process, that takes sometimes months or years to really get into. So it's really about the critical consciousness raising of what communities want, right? So when we do approach communities, we talk about what does it mean for them to have access to decision makers? What does it mean for them to start making those decisions for them? What does development actually look like? It's not about projects or external funding coming in. When we talk about community philanthropy, it is around the agency, the power, how communities or how communities define what success looks like for them. And sometimes success looks like a very simple thing. I think sometimes the development sector, we have a way of complicating matters. unnecessarily with complicated log frames and, theories of change, things that sound very nice, but when you're talking to a small scale farmer, for instance, in Ogoniland or somewhere in Nigeria, log frames doesn't mean anything to them. What matters to them is if they have own agency within their own family. Can women talk back to their husbands? Do they understand that they have rights? And I think a lot of the work that we do is around human rights issues. So marginalized groups, women, young girls and boys, communities dealing with disability, communities just not having the right sort of dignity to live. So a lot of this conversation for us is about dignity of life. What matters to people sometimes it's not about a new school building being built or a well being built or a road. Those things are nice, and those things are the responsibility of the government and other social service institutions. But sometimes it's, are you happy? Do you like your life? What do you want to change about things that are happening? So I think success for us tends to be, I think somebody called it very fuzzy, feel good things. But that really matters in terms of ultimately how communities define what matters to them.
Thank you. This issue of power, thank you so much for bringing that up. Ana Maria, you talked about something during our pre-conversations around grantee partners or people in community being pressured to either apply for or accept money when it's actually not what they are trying to do or feel is important to the community. How do you all kind of address that and approach that work within community at the foundation?
I think that's one of the biggest risks, at least in Colombia, because financial sustainability is the biggest challenge for social organizations. And very often what happens is that in the search of financial sustainability, in the search of funds, you end up giving up your focus, your priorities, and in order to attend the requirements or the priorities of these large donors. We ourselves in the Carvajal Foundation made that mistake in the past, and we recently corrected that with this a new strategic planning we did a couple of years ago. But it happened to us. So they start asking you, not only international agencies of cooperation agencies, but also the national government, for example, they start asking you for help. And if you have a successful program in any variable, they start asking you for help. So since you are succeeding, improving the children's proficiency in reading or math skills, just to give an example, they ask you, why don't you come with us, help us bring that solution to other cities in Colombia or other neighborhoods, and the temptation for you, it's easy to fall in that quest of expanding the reach of the programs, but at the same time that leads you to abandon your focus. In our case, our focus is geographical, is Cali, Buenaventura, which is only 2 cities in a country of 1,000 cities. So we ended up expanding so much our work all around the country, and we abandoned our own communities. So there's a risk not only in terms of geography, but also in terms of the programs and the social variables you are addressing as a foundation. Sometimes they push you to other subjects that are not necessarily your expertise, and even worse, are not necessarily what the communities need, as I was saying before. So I think that's a huge risk, and it happens very often here in Colombia. It's hard to match. It's difficult to match large donors and governmental agendas with the local work of NGOs and the community priorities. It's not easy to make that match.
I think I find similar challenges here as well. Yes, thank you, thank you. I want to talk a little bit about risks and challenges. When engaging in philanthropy in your regions, what are the most significant risks and challenges you've observed that could maybe undermine the effectiveness of giving?
You want me- Yeah.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
All right. Excuse me. A new philanthropic paradigm for Africa is really needed to allow for how we fund in complexity, how we tackle root causes. I understand, or at least appreciate, that philanthropy, and I'm using philanthropy with a big P and not the little p, which is about local giving. So philanthropy does continue to play a significant role in addressing systemic problems and offering sometimes innovative solutions to local and global challenges. 2 months ago, I was at the 5th African Philanthropy Conference that was co-hosted by Trust Africa and other partners in Zimbabwe. And there were many questions asked about the role of and the impact of African philanthropy. And I felt like I left that conference with a list of probably another 20 questions about what philanthropy could possibly mean in Africa. So the first question that came out for me was, what is standing in the way of doing good? You know, ultimately, all of us are in this sector, in this business of trying to improve lives. And yet it is the most difficult thing to do good. It's very easy to do bad, corruption not including. But there are, when you talk about risk, is that this is the part of sort of trying to unpack the complicated way of funding, sometimes in just very complex ways. I think, Yvonne, you'd also mentioned maybe we are confusing institutional philanthropy with African philanthropy. And those are two very different things. So even when you think about social movements and funding and supporting social movements, usually there is a push to now institutionalize those movements, which may be or may not be what they actually want. It could just be an advocacy campaign, not necessarily needing to be a brick and mortar NGO or CSO institution, right? I guess the other questions that I got from that conference was, you know, how much independence do African philanthropic institutions really have when it comes to resources, and especially when resources are predominantly coming from the global north? Which I think for me makes it complicated sometimes for us to really advocate for the issues that matter, or for us to push back on some of the global issues that are rising up. So it's been a very sort of silent space when it comes to talking about Gaza, for instance, the war in Gaza and Palestine, when it comes to the African philanthropy spaces, because a lot of the money is coming from actors or institutions that are tied to that. So you can't be political sometimes in your advocacy work, in your development work. And so if we don't have true independence of our own funding, then we can't really push that needle. We can't really advocate for change. We are ultimately, in the end, doing other people's work or what they think is important in communities. So I think, you know, the last question really there is, where is the African money for African transformation that is outside of high network individuals and private family foundations that tend to only work on issues close to the founder interest, right? And again, when we think about high network individuals on the continent, the work that they do are very soft, or let me just be very blunt, very soft sort of social issues that don't shake the table, issues that are not going to rock any political alliance that or partnership that they may have. And so they're not going to dramatically or at all or aggressively advocate for rights claiming for gay rights, for instance, or for real women's or feminist philanthropy that sometimes really challenges power dynamics within the systems. So if we have our own money that is not tied to other external sources of funding, maybe the conversation can be a bit more radical or aggressive in addressing some of these changes.
Okay, Esther, you know, you just created another conversation, right? A whole other conversation. And it's funny because I'm looking.
Let me answer another question then.
No, that's okay. That's okay. We'll circle back. It's so funny. I see Barclay Jones is a colleague here in Colorado who's in the audience, and I actually thought about a article that he gave to me by Bayo Okomolafe, who talks about giving philanthropy its freedom papers. I haven't actually read the article yet, so, but this conversation exactly, and I feel like you and I feel like we've talked about this. This is a conversation that's been going on for a while, particularly on the continent. But you just made me think about that paper. Yeah, that's okay. Whoo. Okay. So much. Ana Maria, I want to jump over to you too to talk about some of the risks and challenges as well that you're seeing.
I totally agree with Eze, and a lot of what she just said applies exactly to Colombia. We are far away, but very similar in many ways. I would add two risks I find. One of them is the risk of lose people's trust in communities. Trust. It's very easy for that to happen. I find that communities are tired of disjointed interventions, and there is sometimes an excess of interventions that in the end don't succeed in the end. In fact, when we were reviewing the strategy of our family foundation, we invited a lot of experts, and we went to universities to find out, research about how to better do the job. And there was this professor at one university in Cali who has been studying the private investment only in education, in the public education system. And it was really frustrating to see that lack of coordination meant millions of pesos of dollars invested in schools with no impact at all, and without talking to each other. So actually there was one school I remember that had 14 interventions led by different organizations, private companies, NGOs, governments, everybody trying to do something about the poor quality of the public education, a lot of money in the school, and nothing going on. And when you look at teenage pregnancies were high, school grades were terrible, reading proficiency was terrible. So that lack of coordination between the actors of the ecosystem, I think it's a huge risk, and I see it every day in my work. And another risk I would like to mention is what I call parachute development. You just jump into communities with what you think is the best solution for them. That again it happens. It's very often to see that in Colombia. So you develop a program with the best of intentions. It works in some communities. So immediately, what you want to do is to export that to other cities or other neighborhoods, or other communities, without ever asking what those people need, think, dream. And that also is very common in Colombia, and I think it does a lot of harm in the end, because it sounds obvious, but we don't listen to communities as we should. And that parachute development is a huge risk. Should we jump into challenges immediately, or
No, please go ahead. Go ahead, continue.
because in terms of challenges, I find well, the biggest one for me is the need to speed up the pace. The velocity, the speed at which social problems grow is so fast, and it's faster than, of course, our ability to cope with those challenges. So I think we have to partner more. I think we need to learn how to work more collaborate in a more effective way. I think we need to learn of effective collective impact movements, of which are great examples all around the world. But definitely we need to speed the pace and to scale the work that we do. I like to think, to act local, but thinking global. So of course our reach is reduced to some neighborhoods in Cali and Buenaventura, but we are always thinking as how can we expand that into public policy, into governments who are the ones who have the power and the resources to scale and to reach and transform people's lives and move the needle in a substantial way. So I would say that the need to speed the pace and to scale are the biggest challenges in Colombia.
Essay, did you want to add to that in any way?
Yeah, I'll talk. So Anam just mentioned about the need to increase the pace in how we address problems. But I think for me, I always go back to the fact that the development sector, this is an 80-year-old, 90-year-old problem that we have inherited. And it is time for it to change, right? It is a broken system that was never meant to empower local communities. And so because the problem is 100 years plus old, it is going to take us not 100 years, but a significant amount of time to to turn that ship around so that it's something that really works for all. And I think there is a lot of, when we come to shift the power, global movement, there's a lot of requests from
Essay.
naturals, from NGOs, from donors, from the global north, wanted to do this thing. Oh, can you hear me?
You broke up just a little bit. Just go back a few.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can you still hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
I can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay.
Uh-oh. Essay, I think we lost you for a moment.
I don't know where. Okay, I don't know where you lost. It didn't lose me.
That's okay. That's okay.
I'm still here.
Go ahead. Keep
I'm
talking.
still. Can you hear me?
Go ahead. Oh, shucks. I think we lost you again, Essay. That's okay, Essay. Let me give you a moment.
It looks like you can hear me.
Yeah, you're breaking it up a little bit. Let me go to the audience really quickly. Oh, okay, she's gonna relog. She's gonna log back in. Thank you all for your patience on the tech issues too. This is what happens when global conversations happen sometimes. Things are different in other parts of the world. While we're waiting for Essay to come back to us, I want to encourage you all to put some questions into the Q&A. We have a few. I have a few that you all submitted when you did your registration, and then we have a few in the audience. Essay, are you back with us? Essay? Oh, shucks. Okay. I have a few questions, and I'm gonna actually, I feel bad. I'm gonna go ahead and ask the question. And actually, Ana Maria and Essay, I think you all can see the questions as well. So I'm gonna begin with the first question. And if you put your name up here, I'm gonna assume you don't mind me mentioning your name, even though I think the audience can see it, it's fine. Niamani Mutima, who is head of the Africa Grantmakers Affinity Group, asked the question, what do the panelists see as the relationship between formal philanthropy organizations and the government? And you all have talked a little bit about some of the challenges. Can philanthropy organizations play a role in changing policies that impact the lives of communities? And Ana Maria, I'll stay with you because I know that I'll start with you rather, because I know that one of the pieces of your work includes policy, correct?
Yes.
Please.
The answer is absolutely yes. I mean, philanthropic organizations have a huge role in influencing public policy. And I find that it's a good combination of different kinds of assets, since governments have, as I said before, the power, the resources, the ability to act in a massive scale. But at the same time, philanthropic capital has the ability to make mistakes, for example. Something you cannot do when you are in office. You can even go to jail if you make mistakes, if you are in power or leading any governmental institution. But philanthropic capital can experiment, can innovate, can be patient. You can take the time you need to develop an adequate social solution. So philanthropic capital has some advantages that, combined with the ability of governments to massively expand solutions, are the best of the two worlds. It's the best combinations. In our case, in Colombia, for example, we started working in the 70s to help micro entrepreneurs, micro businesses. We designed a methodology to train them in basic management concepts so that they could calculate the cost of a product or a service, so that they could make a business plan. We helped them design a project so that they could receive credit. And that program was very successful in increasing families' income, since in Colombia, 80% of the economy is informal. It's the medium and very small businesses struggling to find resources, economic resources for their families. So that program that was developed by the Carvajal Foundation was later adopted by the government as a national policy. More than 150 NGOs all across the country use that methodology, and even that program was expanded throughout Latin America and as far as Vietnam. The IDB, for example, the World Bank, adopted the methodology and used it to improve and to translate it into public policies in other countries as well. So to your question, that if philanthropy can influence governments, I say absolutely yes. And actually, I think that's the goal, because the amount of the resources that we manage at NGOs is so small compared to public budgets. So ourselves, it's very, if we don't work together with the governments, our impact will inevitably remain very, very small.
Thank you. So true, so true. Essay, are you back with us?
Yes, I've been following the conversation. Can you hear me now?
I can, and I saw your note in the chat. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you. I have a question that was asked during registration, and I'm gonna ask this one. This is from Alice at Jola House Foundation in Liberia. Now, Alice, the answer to your question is yes, but let me ask the full question, and then I would love to hear from Essay and Ana Maria about how we might tackle this one. If possible, can international donors use more flexible and adaptive funding models that allow circular approaches and long-term investment rather than short-term specific project grants? So now the answer to your question is yes. That's not the problem. The problem, I think, and Ana Maria and Essa, I'd love for you to also, how do we actually make the case? This conversation and this is basically long-term general operating support, core support, right? Support that actually supports, that invests in the entire organization versus a particular project at a point in time. Giving to organizations in a way that actually thinks about sustainability. And I've been in philanthropy 23 years. Now, when I got into philanthropy 23 years ago, my mentor, who had been in philanthropy about 25 years before that, so now we're talking 2 generations. We've still been having it. We're still having this conversation around core operating and general operating support. Do either of you have ideas about how to, just Ana Maria, to what you said earlier, be a little bit more urgent about some of this work? How do we push this forward? How do we talk to our colleagues who give about the importance of this kind of giving, the kind of giving that Alice is talking about?
I think this is a question or a conversation about power. Again, I'm sorry to keep going back to that.
Don't apologize at all.
I think, there was a time in development where core funding was not such a taboo or complicated or difficult ask, right? So philanthropic or donors gave to institutions. Sorry, something is popping up on my screen about language. Okay, gave to institutions really to support them and to support their growth. The thing that's happened is that in the development sector, we've turned ourselves into service delivery. And so that makes it hard then to now talk about core support. I think, for donors, one of the things that they can do, I guess, maybe to do this is really, there's some organizations or some philanthropic organizations that have begun to think about the legitimacy that they play in the sector and whether or not there is a role for them to continue to play. So one of our partners in Uganda has described it very, very, very clearly in this change system, in redesigning an alternative humanitarian system that really works for all. Donors, bilaterals, sometimes governments have 3 options. They can transform, which is ultimately what we are hoping that they do, where they give access to their resources, not just money, but to platforms, to networks, to advisory services. They can transform. They can die well, which is the idea that they sunset their organization and give away all of their money completely and remove themselves from the equation of donor grantee or donor sort of conversation. Or because movement systems change and shift of power and decolonizing aid, the third option is that they can die badly. And if they do die badly, it is because their resources have fully taken with them. And I'm talking about things that are not going to be so blunt in their academic. So they can transform or they can die badly. And those are in this change, systems change exercise that we have. And it isn't a bad thing to give away complete money. The concept of your philanthropic foundation or vehicle that you're using. It is about power dynamics. If it is not an uncomfortable one, then you are not making the right kind of change. It needs to be an uncomfortable conversation. Really talks about relevance.
Oh, no.
Mm.
We lost her. I hope you all heard the tail end about it. It's not the type of foundation. It's actually the willingness of the foundation to give in a different way. SA, we lost you for a minute. Oh,
I
you know
think I
what?
had,
Oh, SA?
yes, I had finished my remarks. I don't know if you heard all of that.
I think I caught the tail end. I hope I didn't interpret incorrectly. Ana Maria?
Well, that is what your question is really, it's really difficult to change the mindset of especially of the large donors, because usually large donors and governments are on a hurry to show results. Actually, governments have a specific term in time that they need to show the impact and the effectiveness of all the promises they made during the political campaigns. And unfortunately, social development takes time. You cannot earn the trust of a community in 6 months, not necessarily. Sometimes it can take years for that community to trust you and to achieve some sort of change. So I find very, very difficult to convince donors of that fact that social development takes time, and that I'm sorry for being repetitive, but that's something that I am obsessed about, and it's the need to listen to communities, to listen in the large sense of the word. And that also takes time. Donors don't like to listen. Donors like to jump into communities with their own perspectives or their own solutions, again, with the best of intentions. Of course, they want to help, not they want to do any harm, but sometimes they do harm. It's very difficult. I think that's one of the biggest challenges.
No, it's actually, and I don't think there's no apology that's needed. I think that's one of the things that we have to have more conversations among ourselves and be realistic about what we are and are not doing well. And I don't think that's a conversation that every foundation or individual philanthropist for that matter, doesn't seem prepared to have. But that's okay. We won't actually stop talking about it, and we won't actually stop talking about power or these issues that are really holding our communities back from their work. I have another question, and actually, I appreciate Emma posting this. I was going to actually respond to this question. Would love to hear about what issues are resonating with most Black and Latinx diasporic philanthropists in the U.S. and beyond. Our research indicates the likelihood of giving to education, cultural, civic organizations, and has that changed? I'll tell you what we're seeing is education for sure, climate. A lot more philanthropists are very interested in climate, particularly because we're seeing a lot of consumption in the US or in the West, and a lot of the repercussions or the dangers happening in the global South. And so donors are also interested in climate issues, and then definitely advocacy and political power. Ana Maria and Essay, what are you seeing that's resonating with Black and Latinx or Latin donors?
Well, I see here in Colombia, there's the biggest emphasis is placed on education. Climate is not an issue in Colombia, at least for now. I would say that the main cause is education, and at the same time, there are other issues that are very important for the country, that are a huge concern, that are not being addressed by philanthropy. For example, polarization. We have an increased polarization, xenophobia. Now that we have this conflict in our neighbor country in Venezuela, we have this huge migration from Venezuelans, and xenophobia, or the I don't know if that's a word in English. Xenophobia, is that a word?
Yes, yes.
We have seen an increase of xenophobia against Venezuelans, that it's really, really sad. That's a huge concern, and there's no philanthropy around. But
Wow.
education is the main subject here.
Okay. Essay, what are you all seeing among Black or African donors when they're thinking about giving?
Education is big, but I would also add healthcare or
Mhm.
health interventions has maybe the second or third way of what they support. And again, this is about what they can count and they can see and they can track.
Mm.
So some of these things that the diaspora give are things that are easy to track, things that are easy to report on. So when it comes to social issues, human rights issues, you don't find a lot of giving in those particular sectors or in those particular areas. But education, health, you talked about environment, and also I think there is something around consciousness raising, or if that's a political sort of direction in giving as well.
Thank you, thank you. I have another question. So Alicia Delia is in the audience. I'm gonna kind of combine your question because it looks like you say you're looking for lessons or strategies on mobilizing donors within your own country. Could you two speak to a little bit, and you've talked about this. You talked about this quite a bit in the beginning. But Ana Maria, how are you actually talking to donor colleagues about doing this work? And you spoke a little bit about this earlier too when you talk about the foundation, but is there anything you want to add? Alicia asked this question about mobilizing donors and other families of wealth.
Well, I think in Colombia, as I said before, there is the movement is growing, fortunately, and the more and more you see businesses engaging in social development. Sometimes when we're talking about family businesses, sometimes is that they get inspired by other families. But at the same time, what we see is that consumers are demanding that from the companies. So even if the owners didn't think about this in the recent past, now it's something that the market is asking companies to do. For example, in terms of recycling, environmental issues, and in other areas of social development, it's a market pushing companies and families to get involved in social development. That's what I see here, and the movement is growing. As I said, now we're talking about more than 600 big NGOs in Colombia, and the majority of them doing a great job.
Excellent. Essay?
I wanted to understand the question a bit more. I think is it country foundations or community foundations? What is the...
So it's donor mobilizing for in-country foundations. And so I think for Alicia, and Alicia, feel free to jump into the chat. She's trying to figure out how to mobilize donors within her country
to support
community. She doesn't mention a particular issue area.
Mm-hmm.
She said this has been part of her strategy. I'm looking for lessons or strategies on donor mobilizing. Here we go. I'm wondering if the diaspora of wealth have been involved. So Alicia, are you asking how? I understood your question to find out from both Ana Maria and Essay, how are donors mobilizing within their countries? And how are you all using that as part of your strategy? Did I get that correct? I like that question actually though, SA. How is the Community Foundation, the Global Fund actually? And I guess this speaks
Yeah.
directly to your work of mobilizing donors.
Yeah, this is about changing practices, at least the way I understand the question. So this is about changing donor behavior and practices for specific regional or national funding. And I think for the Global Fund, a lot of our work has been showcasing to donors the alternative models and getting them to sort of join the bandwagon, right? So I just like Anna had mentioned, donors tend to follow other donors. If they see something working successfully in one country or in a particular region, it is more likely for them to support that. But one of the other ways that we have been encouraging or discussing or influencing donors is to support networks. So there are networks that sit outside of traditional registered, NGOs or organizations or even government institutions or philanthropic institutions, but network building, network movement building, movement generosity, social movements, these things tend to operate a little bit looser. And this is also part of giving away power, or at least giving away some of your power, maybe not everything for some donors, is how do you support the way people work that sits outside of that. So that has been part of our influencing and advocacy work is in influencing a different way of giving and in showcasing what is possible in the alternative models of donor support. But I would say, I thought the question initially was about the creations of community foundations on the ground, but maybe that is not the question.
No, but actually, it's funny you say that. Talk about creating community foundations on the ground. That's actually something that's very interesting to me. One of the things that Moore Philanthropy did, we entered into a partnership with Pivotal Ventures and wanted to actually invest in other community foundations, excuse me, because we figured there's plenty of work to be done. And how could we partner with other folks in other parts of the country, particularly folks in the middle of the US and in the South, to actually engage donors in their regions to do the work in their regions that needs to be done. Is that work happening also on the continent, the creation and building of new community foundations?
There seems to be a particular interest in the last 2 years, especially in East and Southern Africa, not so much in West Africa. This push by Western donor to create community foundations, to change the names of organizations and have them set up as community foundations using the definition that the US uses around community foundations, which are endowed institutions for a specific geographical area. What this has done is that for many of these new community foundations, they are not endowed. And so you then put them in the same basket of looking for funding on a yearly or 3-year or however long the strategic plan is. And so I think I have some questions about, is community foundation building the right approach to address some of the systemic issues in Africa? Is that the right approach? I know they've tried this in Eastern Europe with the creation of community foundations, but there the context and the historical legacy around colonialism is different, and it just resonates very different on the continent. But it seems like East Africa and Southern Africa have more appetite, should I say, for this type of creation, which just gives me a little bit pause. If they're not endowed, if they're not supported from the beginning to be truly, to live into perpetuity, or to be, at least 10 years, 20 years, if they don't have that particular sort of foundation from the beginning, I don't know what the value is. What I am also seeing is that there is an addition of, they add a specific new word, which is community development foundations. So many of the organizations now have development as part of their definition for what a community foundation looks like. And this has to do with the way legally charity type organizations can be registered on the ground. So you're in Nigeria, for example, you're either an NGO or you are a charity organization. There isn't a middle ground for community foundations. And so they have to register as something that can be legally recognized according to the local laws. And so usually you have, limited, what is the word now? Limited liability trust.
Mm-hmm.
Board
Yes.
of trustees. You can be registered as a charity organization if you work on political or human rights issues. The source of your funding needs to be questioned. So the word development has been a way, in the addition of this foundations, has been a way to kind of bridge that gap between an NGO and a charity/religious institution.
Wow. Okay, that's a whole other conversation also. This difference between the community foundations. Ana Maria, are you all seeing anything similar? You talked a little bit about the evolution of philanthropic institutions in Colombia earlier, but are you seeing anything around the development of community foundations or foundations sitting in communities in a particular geographic region?
Yes, actually, 3 or 4 years ago, the Colombian Congress passed a law that made more difficult or more strict the requirements for an NGO to have the tax exemption status. And the aim of that law was to clean up a little bit the entire ecosystem, because in Colombia, it is usual that corrupt politicians used, and businesses people as well, used NGOs as a facade, as just to obtain tax exemption, but with no evidence of social impact at all. And now, in order for you to maintain the tax exemption, you have to every year submit the information to the Colombian IRS, and you need to prove the amount of resources that you invested and what kind of job did you do and what kind of results did you obtain with your work. But at the same time, that has been counterproductive for community organizations that are not strong enough, that are not financially sustainable. And for them, it's really hard to maintain as NGOs with these tax exemptions. So the purpose of the goal of the law was good, but in the end, it did a lot of harm to community and local organizations as well. They are having a hard time.
Wow. I wish we could keep going. It's been a pleasure, and I still have so much more to learn from both of you. I'm excited about remaining in conversation with you both. As we close, before we close out, I want to actually this is what I want you to tell me on the way out. This question, I want to get this question in, and so I'd love for this to be your closing comment. If it's something, if there's something you haven't mentioned, what are some of the most under-recognized forms of generosity in your community or your country, and how can we elevate these? I love this question. What are some of the things that are most unrecognized, and how can we bring visibility to it? Essay, I'll ask you to begin.
I think so. What COVID-19 did, it was more of a university because of the many different things that it taught us. And what I think the lesson that I got from COVID was that we didn't need in African communities, we did not need to be told how to take care of one another. We already knew that. We already were sort of stewards of care. And that is because the relationship, I think what Anna had talked about earlier, we had already spent years building solid relationships with one another. And so I think if we had to take anything from COVID, is how do we elevate this practice of really having real relations, people relationships with our communities, where we care about how they are living, not just wanting them to be resilient. And I don't really like the word resilient because it means you are still struggling, but how do we have thriving communities where happiness is the success indicator? What makes a happy community? I think that is ultimately one of the lessons that I took away from COVID. It is the informal local philanthropy of how we support one another.
Excellent.
I don't know if that
Maria?
answered your question.
It did. Yes, informal philanthropy. A friend of mine told me once, she said that there are hundreds of market women who put PhD students through school. Yes. She just broke it down for me one day. Ana Maria, under-recognized. How do we elevate?
Well, yes, I think the majority of Colombian philanthropy never hits the media headlines, and probably will never do. You see thousands of social organizations working silently every day, addressing all sorts of development issues, only looking for their community's recognition. And I'm okay with that. I don't necessarily think we need to elevate that. I think that has been an invisible power that has helped us survive in Colombia after years of armed conflict, guerrilla, drug trafficking, all the problems we have had as a country. And what I find that has helped us stay together and survive has been that invisible community philanthropy. But I don't necessarily think we need to make that a big news headline, not necessarily.
Just keep doing good work. Thank you both so very much. Thank you to our audience for your patience and for being here. And thank you for the team that helped put this together. I hope you all have a beautiful week. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thank you for
Thank you. Thank you for dealing with all of my internet connection issues.
No worries. We all have them.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.